everyone. I am Shuddha. Well, I have a longer name, but this is a shorter version of it. Um, I am a PhD student at the University of Manchester, UK. Firstly, I would like to thank all the organizers of Social Ontology 2021, which is hosted by University of California, San Diego. Um, and today I will be presenting my paper, Trust and Social Roles. Okay, so here are the um, five sections of my paper, and I hope that by the end of the five sections, my arguments will fall into place. Okay, so I'll be analyzing trust with the help of social roles and role relations. Right. So, in the philosophical canon, interpersonal trust is taken to be the dominant paradigm. Now, what is interpersonal trust? It's very simple. Interpersonal trust is between two parties, the truster and the trustee. Now, usually, this kind of trust is defined as a singular phenomenon. Like every kind of like trust behaves similarly in every kind of interpersonal arrangement. Two, it is assumed to exist in closed dyadic arrangements, that is, between the truster and the trustee, governed by norms of trust and trustworthiness. Three, this kind of interpersonal trust is assumed to be unaffected or indirectly affected by norms and conventions of the society. Now, in my understanding, this canonical view will find it difficult to explain two things. One, it will find difficult to explain why betrayals in certain dyadic arrangements leave an impact not only on the truster, that is not only within the dyad, but also outside the dyad on the entire society. For instance, if a professor betrays the trust of a student, then it might so be the case that it's not only the student who feels betrayed, but the entire the impact is felt on the entire university. And if it is so big, then it is actually felt also in the outside society. Secondly, the canonical understanding will find it difficult to account for the differential significance and the different dynamic trust has in different social relationships. For instance, in let's say the dynamic that trust has in personal relationship versus the dynamic that trust has in civic relationships. Okay, now what do I say? I propose that we look at the social context against which trust interactions are taking place. And how do we do that? We do it by looking at the social relations in which trust interactions take place. And why do I do that? I do it because I think that only part of the story is told by various accounts which define the psychology of trust in abstract. Supposing that such interactions occur in closed, standalone truster-trustee arrangements, unaffected by social context, shared values, and norms. Contrary to that, my approach wishes to study the social relationships in which trust interactions are embedded. This would help understand not only what trust is in ideal circumstances, but more importantly, how it functions under real social and political conditions. The nature and norms of social relations contribute heavily to determining the nature of trust in those relationships. It is because such an interaction occurs between norms of relations and norms of trust, that we find variations in the nature of trust across different relationships and in different societies. And to understand the nature of the relation, I turn to a structural view of society where social actors are recognized as role occupants and social relations as role relations, that is, relations occurring between the role occupants. What are social roles? Social roles are recognized position in a social division of labor with sets of normative expectations associated with them. So they are recognized positions which have normative expectations. Now, there are five initial remarks. I will not use examples for all these five, but if anybody has questions, we can discuss it. Firstly, the roles are born out of certain normative ratiocination, that is either from a normative from a consensus or a difference among the members of a society. Two, The types and definitions of roles vary across societies and cultures. So you can have different roles in different societies, and you can have same roles but different expectations, different definitions in different societies. Three, roles do not provide us with perfect directives. Rather, they provide us with approximate guides to social conduct. Role expectations are now more open-ended than earlier societies. This has been kind of agreed by both Hardin, both philosophers and sociologists alike. Um, Fourth, roles generates expectations not only of function but also of behavior. So there are certain normative expectations of behavior from role occupants. For example, if a politician uses dog whistle on the issue of citizenship, then people take a note because that is a deviation from what is expected of a politician, a responsible politician. And fifth, and the last point is that at any given time, one person plays many roles. Therefore, there is every possibility of role conflicts, resolutions to which will depend on practical situations. Okay, now what I want to focus on is this. I take this framework of internal and external goods that Alistair McIntyre uses with respect to practices, what he calls practices, and I kind of project this framework on the idea of roles. Let's see how it works. So I say that roles have internal and external goods. Now, what are internal goods? They are non-contingently related to roles. That is, they are not accidentally related. They are constitutive ends. That is, they lend purpose to roles. And thirdly, they have intrinsic importance to roles. One internal good of the role of a teacher is to disseminate knowledge. External goods, on the other hand, are contingently related. They do not provide constitutive ends, that is, they do not lend purposes to roles, and they have practical importance. That is, no matter how good you are or how well intended you are in pursuing the internal goods, you will need the external goods to aid you in that pursuit. So, one external good of a teacher is money. Three quick points about this. Commitment to internal goods is needed to realize the purposes of the rules because they provide the constitutive ends. Second, despite the practical importance, commitment to external goods alone is insufficient for fulfilling the purposes of rules and rule expectations. Thirdly, pursuit of external goods must be subordinated to the pursuit of internal goods. As I said before, that they must help one pursue the internal goods, but they shouldn't be the main pursuit of any role occupant. Okay, the role relations and the goods. I argue that role relations are predicated on the internal goods of the roles. For example, the relation between a teacher and a student involve the internal goods of these two role occupants. The teacher must be committed to pursuing their internal good, and the student or students must be committed to pursue their internal goods of their respective roles. Second, a commitment to internal goods is necessary to fulfilling role expectations and also realize the value of the relationship. And it follows that successful role relations thus operate on the assumption that the other participant is committed to the internal ends of the roles. So one must be able to assume that the person whom I am friends with has a commitment to internal ends of being a friend. That's why we are friends. Okay, now there are two caveats. One, we always cannot we can't say that commitment to internal ends alone is sufficient for fulfilling role expectations. There has to be a place for competence. We can be a teacher can be very much committed to disseminating knowledge, but maybe they don't have sufficient expertise. In that case, there will be problem fulfilling role expectations. Nevertheless, commitment to internal ends remains a necessary condition, a necessary motivation for being able to fulfill the purposes of the rules and role expectations. Two, expectation of commitment up to a substantial extent is kind of expected. This is because we don't live in an ideal world where we will be able to expect fullest commitment from the other participants. Maybe we ourselves can't be fully committed to our own roles, but we can expect commitment up to a substantial extent. The greater the scope of such commitment, the better be the relation. Now, why do I talk about roles and role relation in case of trust, in trying to analyze trust? Here are my five reasons. First, roles contextualize both the objective and the attitude of trust. There are philosophers who say that there has to be a task for trust to exist. So I trust X to do the knee surgery. Now, there has to be the knee surgery in order for that kind of trust to exist. I'm not going into disputing or defending that claim, but what I say that you need to identify the role in order to determine the nature of task. For example, I will not trust any X with the knee surgery. I will only trust a doctor with the knee surgery. So roles determine the nature of tasks to be assigned. Another camp of philosophers say that no, trust can exist without having a task because it's an attitude at the core. Now the thing is, the attitude cannot be all or nothing. The attitude has to have limits. I argue that roles realistically demarcate the extent of trust attitude. So you can say that I trust this person as a friend, maybe not as a lawyer, to some extent as something else as a neighbor, etc., etc. So roles provide us with clear-cut boundaries where we can expect the attitude to end or to start. Second, roles allow formation of determinate notions of trust and trustworthiness. So we can form general notions of trust and trustworthiness with the help of the idea of roles. Now, this is not to deny that specific formulations can be formulated. For example, this is not to deny that I can say I trust my friend more with driving a car than with cooking, or I will trust my friend with petting my cats but not taking care of my child, etc., etc. This is not to deny such kind of specific judgments, but what it means is that specific notions can be formulated from general ones, but not vice versa. I mean, there are little implications of the other way around. You can have a lot of specific judgments, but that might lead to indeterminacy of judgments. Third, trust expectations are open-ended, and roles allow us to understand the range of associate expectations, which means I trust X, I trust the doctor with knee surgery. Now, it's not only with knee surgery that I'm trusting the doctor with. I'm also trusting them to, let's say, behave cordially with me, prescribe me right medicines after the surgery, do not charge me a lot of money, etc., etc. And this range of expectations is captured when we understand the role of the trustee, and not merely one particular task. Fourth, the empowering aspect of trust is best understood with respect to roles. This means that Philippe Petit and Victoria Maguire argued that trust has an empowering aspect, that is, it has the capability to elicit trust responsiveness from somebody. Now, I argue that it is not with a particular task, but again, when we expect trustworthiness or trust responsiveness, we expect it for a cluster of we have a cluster of expectations towards which we kind of demand trust responsiveness. And fifth is the point about role relations. Betrayal in trust does not only suggest one strained, isolated interaction, but it suggests a strained social relationship. When somebody betrays me, if my partner betrays me today, then the next time I trust somebody as a partner, maybe this person or the other person, any other person, I will be a bit hesitant because I have been wounded by this kind of a social relationship. Okay, so these are the 5 points that I kind of think are essential in highlighting the importance of role identification and in case of trust. Okay, now there are 2 assumptions on which this framework rests. Firstly, trust embedded in role relations need to assume that the trustee is aware of the kind of role they are occupying. So the trustee must be aware that what the kind of role they're occupying, because without that, they will not know the internal ends of the rules. That is the purpose of the rules, and also the range of expectations that follow from them. Secondly, trust embedded in role relations assume that the trustee is committed to the internal ends of the rules, again, committed to a substantial extent. Now, this requirement or this assumption is needed because otherwise, trust will operate on the understanding of an unhealthy role relation. Um, what kind of unhealthy role relation? Uh, for example, the truster can assume that the trustee is not committed to the internal ends of rules. Maybe they are committed to the external ends of their rules, etc. An unhealthy role relation cannot engender healthy trust. Um, and this is quite evident when we think about some roles where we already have such an presupposition. For example, when we trust the police, we expect that they have certain amount of commitment to being good police, or to their internal ends of the role of police, which is to provide safety and security to citizens. And similarly, it's the case with a lot of other rules. So it is not something that I am uh, kind of forcing the requirement. Now, this has some implications. One is that there is no moralizing implication. Um, the mafia can trust their accomplice. One can trust a friend with an immoral act, so long as one can assume that the friend is committed uh, to the welfare of the other friend. And two, which is more important, if the truster is not able to assume that the trustee has sufficient amount of commitment to internal ends of their rules, then trusting becomes difficult. Two candidate scenarios I have identified. One is when the trustee is known to have exclusive interest in the external ends. And such such external ends work as incentives in that relation. And incentives make ground for trust unstable because without such incentives, the trust responsiveness will wither away. Second case is that when the trustee is coerced into the role, such that coercion trumps their commitment as the main motivator to role occupancy. We can imagine the roles of Dalits in India, that is the lower caste people, where they are forced into that role. So whenever any upper caste person or even their own people, they trust them as Dalits or as the roles that they are supposed to occupy for being Dalits, for example, manual scavenging, etc. When they say that I am trusting you, it is not particularly the trust which is at work or the healthy role relation which is at work, but it's basically the power imbalance which is making them do their work. It is a coercion which is making them do their work, and coercion is inimical to trust. You can have such a relation where there is coercion, but for trust to exist in that relation is something very problematic, and which has also been argued by Bayer that coercion is kind of inimical to the very concept of trust. Okay, now here I compare my account with another account which is also a commitment account of trust. It is by Catherine Holly. Catherine Holly discusses general trustworthiness as commitments to a cluster of formally or informally negotiated expectations. Now, their account is an example of trust understood in dyadic arrangements. And this is the reason I argue that it fails to account for interlinking normative commitments one can have outside the dyad. Now, here is a problem which was provided like a puzzle, which was provided by Holly. Parent X is worried about child Y. Y trusts friend Z. Z accepts Y's trust, and parent X bangs on Y trusting Z, and Z betrays. Now, the question is, whom has Z betrayed? There are two possibilities. One, only Y, that is only the child, has been betrayed, in which case the parent has nothing to say in the arrangement. to y as well as x, that is the child and the parent, such that the parent and the child justly hold the same reactive attitude. Now, there is a dilemma that this problem runs into, which is retaining both intuitions weakens trust betrayal connection, and keeping strong trust betrayal connection requires rejecting either of the two possibilities. Now, Hawley says any account of trust will have to choose between A and B. Um, Now, what I propose is that this. So, firstly, my account deals with socially recognized categories, which have socially defined normative expectations. Secondly, the commitment required primarily is to the internal ends of those roles, which allows me to explain the interlinking normative commitments. I would reformulate the question to retain both intuitions and strong trust betrayal connections. My question is, does X get to judge Y to be untrustworthy as a friend? The answer is yes, since Z has betrayed Y, and also in turn failed to prove their commitment to the role of a friend. Thus, Z has betrayed Y and also has failed internally as a friend, which means that Z is to be judged as untrustworthy against the normative standards of being a friend, and Z's reputation as an untrustworthy friend is open to all, and more so to the parent X, as they are related to Z. What this brings to is the conclusion that trust understood in embedded in social relations bring in normative standards and expectations of the society. It is able to explain why betrayals not only impact trust in one interaction, but affects the role relation and at times impacts the society outside the dyad. Different role relations have different significance in our lives, broadly classifying trust in personal role relations such as friendship, partner relations, filial relations, etc., is qualitatively different from and greater in significance than trust in impersonal role relations, such as professional and civic relationships, which essentially means that we need to identify the relations in which trust occur to understand the nature of trust. Therefore, my formulation accounts for the two problems that I listed at the outset. Um, Here are the tentative bibliography, and after which I say thank you. And yes, connect with me if you find my thing interesting or if you have any comments or feedback. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.